Okay, so we're now broadcasting, and this is a big time channel, everybody. So be on your best behavior.
Yeah.
I'm behaving a little differently today because my son is on the stream with me. That's Ben. This is Ernesto, and we have Matt. Other people Matthew. Sorry, Matthew. We might have others joining us as we go along, but we're going to be discussing Karl Marx's book Capital, Volume 1. And I thought maybe I'd give everybody an opportunity to. Oh, look, Tim's on the line. So, okay. So we've got the 5 of us here ready to talk. Hey, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
There you are. Okay.
Just as a warning, my internet, I'm using my phone to connect. So I think if I use video, my sound is just going to die.
Okay, well, I might turn on my camera. Let's see. Don't look at the mess behind me. Just ignore that. We'll turn this like this.
There you go.
Okay, so if Jordan Peterson was on the stream, he would tell me to clean my room.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not. So okay, so we're talking about Capital Volume 1, and I'm going to go left to right, and let people introduce themselves, and then also say what their familiarity is with the text. So starting with my own son, Ben. What is your familiarity with the text? Who are you? What are you doing here?
I'm Ben. I'm your son. I also help run. I'm the education officer for a YDSA group at the University of Oregon, and I invited Matthew and Tim on this chat because they're involved in that too. I've read the first 10 chapters of this book, and I've read the first 5 of them at least twice.
Excellent. Good job, Ben. I raised you right. Okay, Ernesto.
Yeah. Well, I'm a psychologist from Mexico. I'm right now studying Lacan, so that took me to Hegel, that took me to Marx, and I also work in manufacture. So yeah, this whole thing has been very eye-opening for me, and it makes a lot of sense with all of my life experience, right? So yeah, I just got interested in Marx recently and read Volume 1 last month. I'm reading Volume 2 right now.
Well, I'll just say if you're understanding Marx through Lacan, which, by the way, is sort of how I started out trying to read Marx too, because I was interested in Zizek. And I'll just say that you're a deviationist, and we'll be watching you.
Okay.
All right, but we'll look forward to that.
Did I cut out, or did everyone else?
No, Duke's on mute. So.
Oh,
yeah, it says John and Doug.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. That was me. I muted myself.
You
John,
did.
Go ahead and say something, and introduce yourself if you would, and unmute yourself if you would. All right, I'm going to move on. Matthew.
Hey, yeah, my name's Matthew. I'm involved with UOYDSA with Ben and Timothy, and I've worked as a community organizer. And I've read like about 9 pages of Capital.
All right.
Or 9 chapters. Yeah, 9 chapters.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Tim?
Yeah, hi. My name's Timothy Schatz. As you would guess from Ben and Matthew, I'm in the YDSA.
All right, great.
We had I kind of fell behind in our capital reading group that we started here, so I've read about the first 5 chapters.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to start over from chapter 1, and it's just sections 1 and 2 if we can get through that today. So I have some notes here, but they're just scattered notes. They're not really systematic. But what I'd say is that there are a lot of hurdles to jump over in these first two chapters. There's lots of there are a lot of things that where it's easy to go wrong. It's easy to think you understand this first chapter and miss it. It's especially because a lot of it is boring, or kind of mundane. So, for instance, the descriptions of yards of linen and tons of iron, and the bits about utility of a thing and all of that, it's pretty banal. But there are some key concepts here in the first section that will be developed and kind of demonstrated and proven out as we go through the rest of Capital, and the implications of them will be demonstrated as well. But it's interesting to, if you're like a Marxist, or let's say you're coming out of a Marxist party of some kind, some sectarian group, you may be disappointed if you read Capital for the first time, because it starts with such abstract, mundane topics. It doesn't start with how to have a revolution. It doesn't start by describing the plight and suffering of the working class, but starts with the wealth of society presenting itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. So it starts with, like a Coca-Cola bottle, something like that. Just something you'd buy in the store, a commodity. And Marx starts here because he thinks that by focusing on the commodity, he can start to explain capital and how wealth is produced in a capitalist society, which is the aim of this book. So just a couple of observations off the start, at the start here. A lot of times people want to say that the commodity should be thought of as being divided against itself, having two kinds of values: use value on the one side and exchange value on the other. I would say that this is a mistake that you can make reading this chapter. That the way to think of it is not between use value and exchange value, but between use value and what Marx just calls value itself, or value. And value is something that arises through a process of production and then is realized or has a form of appearance in exchange in the market. But that despite the fact that early on here he says that a commodity can be thought of as divided between a use value and exchange value, he goes on later to correct himself and talk about use values and values. So that's just my first observation. Anybody else want to kick in an observation here at the start? Ben?
My memory is that and I think he says, the thing about an exchange value, when you talk about exchange value as opposed to value in the general, is exchange value is the representation of value in terms of its relationship to other commodities. And it's actually the only way you can see value, right? Is if you compare your linen to your coat or whatever.
Yeah. And so why do people think that he starts with the commodity? What is it that makes the commodity so central for Marx? Maybe that's a dumb question, or maybe we should just push on. But go ahead.
Yeah, he kind of just lays that out in the very first paragraph. The wealth of societies in which capitalist mode of production prevails appears as an immense collection of commodities. The individual commodity appears in its elementary form. Our investigation, therefore, begins with the analysis of the commodity. It just seems like a really straightforward thing, unless anyone else has a different reason or understanding why he's talking about the commodity, but really trying to understand the wealth of nations to understand what.
Yeah. Because he's not asking some other questions that we might be tempted to ask today, like, what is the psychological nature of capitalism, or what kinds of people are we going to find under capitalism? What is the ideology of that capitalism produces? These things aren't what he begins with. He's starting with the wealth, the actual material basis of capitalist society. So that's why he's starting with a commodity and kind of denaturalizing it.
I think it's because he's a materialist. The natural place to start is with the form that we find the stuff we need now.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to also be a little bit more historical, you mentioned colonialism and the giant massive empires are being set up at that time. So why does England do so much better than, say, regions in Africa in terms of how much power they can wield or how much they can dominate the planet?
Yeah, that's something that he isn't directly addressing, but if you were interested in the question of why is England wealthier than India, say, and able to colonize India, you might be, this might help you understand that, but I think you'd have to get pretty far down the road in capital before you were going to be able to understand what the impact of commodity production is going to be on the wealth of a nation. I mean, one thing you have to understand is the way that commodity production is driven to expand itself. Then that's not going to be clear in Section 1 of Capital.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that does come up. That would be something that this approach would address. Okay, so I'm going to return to my notes here and say that what he was wanting to explain is capital and how it arrives on the scene in a sense, or not historically, but what it is really. And one way to think about this in a very simple way is that capital is something that the capitalist owns and expands. So the capitalist wants to buy stuff and then sell it for more than he bought it for. And this is seemingly this process of buying cheap and selling dear is sort of a natural process, and the additional value in commodities on the market seems to be derived from their own nature, or the nature of the process. That there's nothing really mysterious about the idea that you go to a shop and you buy something for more than it costs the manufacturer to create, but it's not so self-evident that should be the case, and that's what Marx is trying to explain. Why is it that the capitalist is sort of magically able to make these commodities become more valuable than they originally were worth? Or how is it that these commodities seem to be able to do this on their own? Of course, there's a process of production that's behind the scenes that we're going to immediately turn to start to explain this production of surplus value or capital. So should we read a little bit from this first chapter, Section 1? Anyone want to pick a point to read? Ben, I'll call on you again.
Oh, okay. Do we have a particular area that we want to read from, or because I wanted to go over this example of the geometrical example he uses to explain labor as the base as the measure of value. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. He says, let us now take two commodities, for example, corn and iron. Whatever their exchange relation may be, it can always be represented by an equation in which a given quantity of corn is equated to some quantity of iron. For instance, 1/4 of corn equals X CWT of iron. What does this equation signify? signifies that a common element of identical magnitude exists in two different things, in 1/4 of corn, and similarly in X CWT something ton of iron. Both are therefore equal to a third thing, which in itself is neither the one nor the other. Each of them, so far as it is exchange value, must therefore be reducible to this third thing. A simple geometrical example will illustrate this. In order to determine and compare the areas of all rectilinear figures, we split them up into triangles. Then the triangle itself is reduced to an expression totally different from its visible shape, half the product of the base and the altitude. In the same way, the exchange values of commodities must reduce to a common element of which they represent a greater or lesser quantity. And then he goes on to say that that thing that they can be reduced to is labor.
Yeah.
Right. So what he's explaining here is how it is that even though use values seem to be very different, they still exchange as equivalents. But it's important, I think, to understand that he's explaining not that any exchange could happen, because it's possible that you could exchange two commodities just because one person didn't want the thing they had. Like, let's say I have a bottle of beer that I don't enjoy, and I exchange it for a Star Wars action figure that you've outgrown. So you don't want your Star Wars action figure anymore, and I give you my beer. And I'm not sure as your father that's a responsible thing, but nonetheless, we make that exchange, and then it's over. I mean, it doesn't have any real significance.
I wouldn't want you to have any Star Wars action figures.
Right. You're not going to see a system arrive that is based on the exchange of beer for Star Wars action figures.
Yeah, so the whole subjective theory of value is just out of the window.
Right. Yeah. What Marx is trying to explain is how we have there's kind of a law-like or rigid systemic approach to exchange, one which then can produce profit for the capitalists. That, because I'm not profiting necessarily I'm not even considering what it costs me, for instance, to make or purchase the beer, or what the price of the Star Wars action figure is. It's just a subjective exchange of unlike things based on our own whim. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're trying to explain.
I have to plug in my laptop. Give me a minute.
All right. So this third thing doesn't necessarily, this idea of a third thing doesn't necessarily arrive, or just when anything is exchanged. It's under capitalism particularly that we have to look for this relation and the backdrop of the relation. And I have a note about this idea of the third thing, which is that the way to think about this is as a background for a mode of appearance. So if you have two, let's say you have a lizard and a volleyball, and you want to measure their distance from each other. They're both that distance is going to be in space, and the third thing that they share in common is the way they occupy space, right? And if you can also think of this in terms of like television characters, and television characters might be related to each other in a genre, but what they would share are tropes from the genre, and also the fact that they're both on television. And that third thing would be, you wouldn't find it in the description of their characters or in the actors or anything particular about the television characters, but the fact that they are both appearing on television and are both kinds of characters within a genre. So that's the way to think about this value that helps set up exchanges, is that it's a background context in which these particular commodities will appear. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone want to jump in and read a little more from Capital, or go on here through this first section of which is called, by the way, we should read the section title. It's the two factors of a commodity: use value and value, the substance of value and the magnitude of value. Anybody want to talk about the difference between the substance of value and the magnitude?
I can do it, but maybe someone else wants to.
John, Matthew, Tim, Ernesto.
Oh, please go ahead.
1 second.
Okay, Ben.
Okay. So use values are qualitative, right? So when you're trying to compare, you can't compare use values quantitatively. There's not a good way to talk about the difference in quantity between the use value of a gallon of milk and a Star Wars action figure or something. They're qualitatively different use values. So the magnitude, the kind of value that has magnitude or is quantitative is exchange value, because you can directly compare exchange values to each other, because they're only in the form of the common element of, abstract labor.
So that's the difference between, that's the magnitude.
Yeah, that's the qualitative versus quantitative, or the substance versus magnitude of value.
So you're thinking that the substance,
I think it's what that means.
You think that the substance is the
I may be getting this wrong, and substance of value is abstract labor. And yeah,
I think the substance is the labor itself, and then the magnitude of labor is where does he start talking about magnitude of labor? Let's see.
He right after that example,
a use value or useful article therefore has value only because human labor in the abstract has been embodied or materialized in it. Right. How then is the magnitude of this value to be measured? So the difference is between the human labor and the quantity of the.
Now, the reason I thought he meant labor. Use value when he says substance of value is because it's the two factors of commodity: use value and value, and then in parentheses, substance of value, magnitude of value, which makes me think when he's saying substance of value, he means the use.
But in this paragraph where he says a use value or useful article therefore has value only because human labor in the abstract has been embodied or materialized in it. I think that being embodied or materialized is that that's the human labor is the substance of value.
Okay. Yeah. And all labor is defined through it in magnitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the quantity of the value creating substance, human labor, the labor contained in the article, the quantity of the labor is measured by its duration or the time, and labor time in its turn finds its standard in weeks, days, hours. So the magnitude is a magnitude of time. But this introduces a problem for Marx, because you might think that if you just take a long time to create something, it will increase in value. Certainly, if you're a wage laborer, you might think, well, I have to make a widget. Why don't I take an hour to create this one widget? Therefore, I'm being paid more for my labor. Why should I be paid $6 an hour to make 6 widgets an hour when I could be paid that same $6 if I only make one? So
yeah, but it's socially it's socially determined. It's not like individually, right?
Right, exactly. So what does that mean, though? I mean, we should go over it. I think I know what it means, but Ernesto, why don't you say what does it mean to be socially determined rather than individually?
Well, I mean, all commodities belong in some type of class, and that class is just determined through the entirety of society. The whole point of theorizing over what value is it's for keeping people together, right?
Right. Well, he gives an example. He says that the introduction of power looms in England probably reduced by 1/2 the labor required to weave a given quantity of cloth.
Yeah, industrialization, right?
Yeah. And the hand loom weavers, as a matter of fact, continued to require the same amount of time as before, But for all that, the product of 1 hour of their labor represented, after the change, only a half hour's real social labor.
So it's historically determined then.
Right. But what I would say is that like that's not something that happens in an instant.
Mm-hmm.
And that it could be that the hand loom weavers were able to price their cloth at a higher, higher number to get more money for their cloth than a power loom weaver did for a time, as long as they had some sort of monopoly on some section of the market, or as long as it hadn't become completely dominant that the most of the cloth out in the market was from power looms. And that but even when a given hand loom weaver was able to price their cloth at a higher value, the total value that was produced by cloth in the society would still have declined, because in relation to the whole universe of products, they were basically taking more than the value of their cloth when they were able to get away with pricing it at the old level.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing you think about when you read Marx's Capital is that he's talking about this as if the system is working perfectly, and as if with a lot of the irregularities and inconsistencies taken out, and without following. It's sort of like if you're being taught math, you're going to be asked to, let's say, divide in simple whole numbers to start with. Something, make it just a little easier rather than having to add in all the complications.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any questions about socially necessary labor time?
I guess I just kind of had a comment to summarize what we were saying. So the socially necessary labor time is a trend within the economy, and not particularly. So it's not just embodied in a particular instance, but really all labor that takes place, all production, is kind of in reference to this kind of abstract tendency. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, well, it changes over time, right? I mean, the what's socially necessary in one moment won't be socially necessary later on. In fact, there's a tendency, I think, for the amount of time necessary to create a product or a commodity, for that to go down as we get more and more efficient at production. And we'll find later on that capitalists are very much driven to increase the efficiency of production in order to try to compete and get more than their share of the surplus. So that's definitely a factor. But yes, what's socially necessary is in flux, but as a concept, it kind of remains constant.
At least in like a short enough time span, it's pretty much a constant. I doubt that
the amount of time isn't constant, but the fact of the value being, or the substance of value being, the magnitude of the substance of value, I should say, being determined by what's socially necessary, that remains constant. But what that time is changes, can go up and down.
Should we read the little? I found the paragraph. Hold on, maybe. Yeah. Oh no, it's the same one you read. Never mind. I thought I found a clarifying paragraph, but to be really clear, the amount of socially necessary labor time is the average amount of time it takes to make a given commodity, and it's what determines the value of a commodity, rather than the specific amount of time for that individual object. Right.
Right. So I guess I want to to put some juice in this conversation. I want to hear, do people, when people read this first chapter, does it seem intuitively obvious to you guys that this stuff is true, or does some of it seem like a stretch, or is it counterintuitive? What was your first impression, let's say, reading section 1 of chapter 1?
Well, I mean, for example, I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. So I live in Mexico, and I work in manufacture, and our clients are in Texas, right? So we live exploitation every day, yeah.
Yeah.
And we literally negotiate over prices using labor as value. We we haggle over how much minimum wage is and why it can't just be priced around that, stuff like that, you know. So it made a lot of sense, and it
Which one of you guys is making that noise?
I think it's
Am I making a noise? It must be me. I think I was using my touchpad and it was me. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead. So go ahead, Ernesto.
So yeah, the whole point is that at our work we spend about 10 hours making pallets, and we do that every day. So why, and why is this making money,
Right.
And it made a lot of sense.
When you read this book, did you read it on your own, or did you read it with some of your coworkers, or how did you come to read Capital?
I just read it on my own, just downloaded it off the internet and picked it up.
Okay. So do you think that if you were to take some of these concepts to your coworkers who are helping you, or working with you in the in manufacturing, that it would be intuitively obvious to them as well?
We actually, yeah, kind of, because we, like I said, we work with manual labor, right? It isn't all automated, and we have been automating our production over time, like over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been change, and because it's a very small company, it's like 30 employees, we are all aware of how the money moves around. So we've seen how certain machine makes for certain capital gain, and certain capital gain makes for certain investment, So
Right.
we actually tried to organize the entire development of our production line around labor value.
Yeah. I have a roommate named Hal that Ben knows, who is working now in a warehouse for a bookseller. If they don't have bookstores, they just sell online, and they get a huge inventory of used books in, and his job is to help take it off the trucks and put it on the shelves and organize it. And I don't know all the, it's a complicated system of different people doing different parts of the work. But one of the things that he was describing to me the other day was how there's new scanners. They've invested in these more high quality scanners to get the books in. Also, there's a new automated system with a conveyor belt to automatically scan books. But what's happened is they don't have enough of these scanners for everyone. And so it actually, this innovation is slowing down. The conveyor belt is slowing down the process.
Yeah.
And the other thing is this new scanners that they have, which work really well and would speed up the process, are being held by the boss under lock and key because he's afraid the workers will break them.
Break them?
Yeah.
Sure,
yeah.
sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure
So,
that's a problem.
so in the immediate or medium term, innovation and automation represents, I guess, a number of challenges. One is if you're not very confident, you might not, you might invest so much money in innovating that then you want to hoard that value and not put it to work because you're afraid, maybe you're afraid it will break and then it won't be useful at all. And so I'll hold on to it. And if worse comes to worse, I can sell it on eBay or something like that, innovation is and also an irregular thing, and I guess in the real world of capitalist production. But
yeah.
Okay, so
it's very bizarre for me because we actually we are 20 years in the past. I'm saying, we're getting machines that's over in, I don't know, for example, all of industrial production in the US is already pretty much either done or completely automated.
Right.
And here it isn't. This is, I kind of work at a Mexican Foxconn, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
So it's very weird. It's very bizarre.
What do you do there precisely, if you can tell?
Well, I mean, I speak English, so
Right.
I literally negotiate all contracts with American and American and Danish companies. That's all I do.
Okay, so you're not doing the manual labor yourself then?
No,
Yeah.
no. I'm bureaucrat.
Well, that's nice. That sounds like it would be a more enjoyable life than wrestling with the machines and deciding whether or not, like my friend Hal is doing.
Oh yeah.
Right. All right. So let's move on through the rest of this chapter, or actually this section. I mean, let's see. So Marx, in this first section, he gets through social necessary labor time. He talks about the third thing. He points out that there's a difference between use value and value itself. And then the next section, section 2, is on the twofold character of the labor that is embodied in commodities. And so we've already sort of walked through how there's a difference between the commodities' use or its sensuous qualities or its material qualities, concrete qualities, and the value that really is derived from labor. But now we're going to find out that the labor itself is also divided between the real, actual, physical, sensuous labor that's very variable and it's like the use value in so much as that it's almost incommensurable. You can't really compare, let's say, stitching cloth to pounding concrete. But in terms of the value that's embodied in commodities, stitching cloth and pounding concrete have an abstract labor that's in both. Oh, hello, Christian. So you're joining us. Who wants to jump in on the twofold character of labor? Shall I just read the first paragraph? So at first sight, a commodity presented itself to us as a complex of two things, use value and exchange value. Later on, we saw also that labor too possesses the same twofold nature. For so far as it finds expression in value, it does not possess the same characteristics that belong to it as the creator of use values. I was the first to point out and to examine critically this twofold nature of the labor contained in commodities. As Mark's bragging a little bit. As this point is the pivot on which a clear comprehension of political economy turns, we must go into detail. Let us take two commodities such as a coat and 10 yards of linen, and let the former be double the value of the latter, so that if 10 yards of linen equals W, the coat equals 2W. The coat is a use value that satisfies a particular want. Its existence is the result of a special sort of productive activity, the nature of which is determined by its aim, mode of operation, subject, means, and result. The labor, whose utility is thus represented by the value in its product, or which manifests itself by making its product a use value, we call useful labor. In this connection, we consider only its useful effect. I'm going to read one more paragraph and then stop. As the coat and the linen are two qualitatively different use values, so also are the two forms of labor that produce them, tailoring and weaving. Were these two objects not qualitatively different, not produced respectively by labor of different quality, they could not stand to each other in the relation of commodities. Coats are not exchanged for coats. One use value is not exchanged for another of the same kind. So then he goes on from there. I could keep reading, but I'll stop. But do we see where this is headed? Do people see this division within labor itself? Ben?
Yeah, so he's gonna get to how this so on one hand, labor creates things that are useful, and that's the kind of quality of the labor. On the other hand, they all share in their ability to create value, and the thing that does that is this abstract labor, right? Is what he's going to say. And it's the same as in a commodity. It's got two forms.
Christian is saying that he's having trouble with his microphone, so he's sorry he can't really join us, but he's going to lurk, I guess. So no problem, Christian. Keep going, Ben.
So, okay, he says on the one hand, about 2 pages later, he says on the one hand, all labor is an expenditure of human labor power in the physiological sense, and it is in this quality of being equal or abstract human labor that it forms the value of commodities. So there's the use of the labor, the quality of it, and whether it creates coats or concrete, and then the fact that it is the expenditure of labor power in the physiological sense, which I think he means, you know, if you're laboring, you're using your muscles and your nerves and whatever else. He says that at some point. And so in that sense, and that's the thing, that common element of all the labor is what allows it to create value. Right.
Yeah, so that's a I mean, this idea of abstract labor, I think, is a controversial one in Marx. Somehow more controversial than the idea of abstract value itself, or it's hard for us to consider that, or to kind of hard to believe that two different, very, very different kinds of work could be of equal value simply in terms of the amount of time that is expended. But is that what Marx is claiming here?
Yeah. And he goes on, he even has a paragraph on intensified or multiplied labor, which is just more complex labor, right? Labor. He says some labor, some forms of labor will create more value, but all they're doing is intensifying the amount of abstract labor that becomes, you know, the measure of that is imbued into the commodity, right?
Right. You want to read that paragraph?
Yeah, it's very long,
okay.
But I can
read a section or part of it. Do you think it's relevant? Maybe.
More complex. Okay, he says simple average labor, it is true, varies in the character in different countries and at different cultural epochs. But in a particular society, it is given. More complex labor counts only as intensified, or rather multiplied, simple labor, so that a smaller quantity of complex labor is considered equal to a larger quantity of simple labor. Experience shows that this reduction is constantly being made. The commodity may be the outcome of the most complicated labor, but through its value, it is posited as equal to the product of simple labor. Hence, it represents only a specific quantity of simple labor. The various proportions in which different kinds of labor are reduced to simple labor as a unit of measurement are established by a social process that goes on behind the backs of producers. These proportions therefore appeared to the producers to have been handed down by tradition. In the interest of simplification, we shall henceforth view every form of labor power directly as simple labor power. By this, we shall simply be saving ourselves the trouble of making the reduction. So he's kind of saying that this intensified labor, or this complex labor, is reduced to simple labor, and it's not visible how that happens to producers. It seems to happen outside of their control.
Right. So I guess, you know, we've been talking for just about 50 minutes, maybe a little bit more like 45 minutes. And I feel as though we're dryly kind of going through the first two sections, which is necessary. But I want to cheat a little bit and just open this up for general discussion and kind of chat about why we feel that, like, Marx reading this book today is important, and how we were drawn to Marx, and what our expectations are as we kind of go through this book. Because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is that I feel like it's easy to abandon this when it starts to feel pretty distant from any current political struggles or distant from your life. But I do think that this is a significant work to read today. This maybe precisely because it's so difficult to make it seem relevant politically. So who wants to, I mean, I guess I just want to open this up. What are people's reasons for reading this book today?
I guess I'll start. I think that a lot of the problems that we face in modern society come from commodity production. The fact is, I think it's an ineffective way of managing resources. It causes us to have really an irrational economy. And a lot of people talk about more or just merely moral concerns when it comes to being anti-capitalist, or just vague ecological concerns without really understanding why we're in that situation. And just I find that it's helpful to actually have a more sophisticated understanding than just something bad, or we need to produce stuff that creates less of a harm to the environment.
Right. So you want to have a more thoroughgoing understanding of why these things are happening, and Marx is offering you the most convincing and complicated and fully worked out systemic analysis of the system of capitalism that you hope will then lead you to understand things like why we're having an ecological crisis, or why there's so much inequity in the world, things like that.
Yeah, I would say so. That's a good summary of my thoughts on this.
Well, I just hope that, see, my goal is if I can get enough people to read Capital with me, and next time I want it to be like 10 times as many people, that one, I can be thoroughly confused as I flip around between people, but also then, as more and more people read Capital, we'll get that much closer to having the revolution that I want and living in a fully automated, gay luxury communist world.
Yeah.
So, I'm with you basically, Tim. If we all just can read this book, if we can just get the entire working class to read Capital.
I'm not as optimistic as you, Doug. I don't know if just getting people to read books is going to change.
No, then once they've all read it, then like magic,
then we can have the glorious revolution.
The AI will come online and we'll solve that.
I don't think this is a good revolution, Doug.
All right, fine.
Can I chime in?
Yes.
Well, I don't think that we're going to get everyone to read Capital and then we'll have revolution. But, there's a quote that the point of philosophy is not to interpret the world, but to change it, basically. I think if you want to do philosophy in order to change the world, what you have to do is make it your goal
who
to
got the live
understand.
stream
Someone's
going?
echoing.
Someone's watching while they are online.
I think it's Christian.
Christian, are you there?
No. I think it was.
Okay.
I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
So if you want to understand the world in order to change it, I think that if you want to change the world, then you should understand it, and that means you have to analyze the way the system we live in works. And I think Marx, did that pretty well.
Ernesto, you're on now with your dog.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Her name's Cocoa. So I'm a psychologist, and I feel that the biggest thing that people can get out of Capital is realizing what alienation is like and how they experience it and how they participate in it. Yeah. So a lot of people, they don't understand their relationships or with other people. They don't understand their own concerns of themselves. They don't understand why things happen around them or the political implications of their own life. And I feel like Marx's theory in general is a great way of seeing it, and specifically Capital as a very impressive realization of this whole dialectical style of examination. I mean, it's a great, if anything, it's great practice.
Right. Well, this book forces you to, you're forced to step away from your own subjective experience a bit and consider things objectively, and also face up to, I think as you read through this book, you kind of are forced to face up to the ways in which we truly are alienated from the world we live in. There's a quote that I run at the beginning of my podcast, something like, rather than living in a world of human relations that are mediated by things. We are living in a world of relationships between things that are mediated by people. So we're kind of all in the service of this commodity structure or this capitalist structure. And I guess if you're a psychologist, you might be able to apply this same sort of logic to the kinds of relationships that aren't economic, but that are personal, and point out when certain kinds of ideas or structures are being acted out despite whatever the subjective desires are of a given group of people. Like you might look at a family and say, oh yeah, you know, the father is not helping with the dishes again because of the patriarchal structure that he's living within, or something like that.
You know, I'll give you a great example of how psychology might work with that. So, for example, you know, incels, like they have this whole theory of market value for themselves and the women that participate in society around them. You know, they categorize themselves as alphas and betas and omegas and, you know, I don't know, like all of the Greek alphabet. And so, like, that whole system is kind of a misinterpretation of social relations. You know, it's missing. You know how commodities are supposed to distract us of labor value? It's pretty much the same. It's how fetishization of certain social relationships, which in this case, you know, are very capitalistic in nature, they make people, you know, have these displays of really misguided and twisted masculinity.
Yeah, the problem with incels is not that they try to use economic categories in the realm of sexual relations, but that they have the wrong model. They're all marginal utility theorists.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to correct the incels, but not on the level of their gender politics. They need to be addressed economically. They're bad economists.
Marxist incels.
Yeah. Well, most Marxists are secretly incels anyway.
Oh, too close to home. Too close to home.
But they're just not ideologically so. But no, I'm just, you know, that's not true. I'm a married man, for crying out loud. But yeah, so that's right. We should. I'm going to make a video now on correcting incels for their bad economic theories.
Oh God! Sure. Look forward to it.
At the risk of going into allegory, can I kind of tell you guys what made me a Marxist?
Yes. Is it
actually
Christian?
It was. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. Oh, so I got my stuff working out. And hey, Doug, it's good to talk to you. I've been following you since Diet Soap days.
Oh, cool.
You and C. Derek Varn. But actually, what made me a Marxist, or what made me realize it the most, was working production at like a piecewise place doing electronic assembly, where I was getting paid near minimum dollars per hour for piecewise work. And I knew what these things were getting sold at the other side, plus what all the research and design that went into them. And that cost had already been covered. So the expanded cost behind, like, I was making things, you know, I was turning out these things that were worth like a couple $100 every 10 minutes. I was getting paid $12 an hour. Like, right. Convincing people about Marxist ideals, like, I don't feel like should be hard for anybody that's worked a normal job.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense, right?
Well, yeah, but, you know, like, I worked in a call center at Comcast for a while.
Call center is a little different because now you're dealing with, like, support roles. And, you know, I've done IT support too, but...
Yeah, so it's not as clear there. What you know, I was paid on commission. You know, I had a wage, but I plus also a commission. So if you just got
another weird thing where you're dealing with, like, now you're dealing with, like, you're getting your wage off of, like, what's sold in the marketplace. So you're not actually paid. They're kind of like abstracting part of your labor value off of, like, what it can be sold off in the marketplace, right?
Right. I mean, I feel as though if I had taken the time to really work out what the basis of my pay was and what I was contributing in terms of value to Comcast, I could have worked it out to demonstrate that at the very least that I was working class. And, like, you know, like a true property owner, a real capitalist in that situation, once the product was sold, if I was working as a capitalist, I would have continually had some percentage come in from every cable package I sold.
Here's the thing: I know plenty of salesmen that were fucking dirt poor too.
Right. Now they aren't
work for commissions.
Right. So they had no real property claims on the products that they were selling.
They don't necessarily have a labor value until their labor manifests itself in the marketplace, which is different from a worker. A worker is paid for their wages beforehand.
Well, the other thing is who did I work for? I didn't work for productive capitalists. I worked for a property owning capitalist entity who could only make profits through having protection from the state. I mean, and demanding rent.
Yeah.
Comcast, they were not getting
the whole IT infrastructure. I mean, it follows the electric. Actually, the IT infrastructure follows like the electrification of the United States very closely. Monopoly rent, and then like monopoly to privatization in the United States.
Right. But if you're working if you're a worker in that system, it's kind of difficult to figure out what you're even contributing. So it's hard then to feel as though you're being exploited.
Yeah, can I put something in for a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, thankfully, looks like I'll have a job. But before, I've done tutoring work.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to see the value there because you're still a student, but you're technically helping to educate the managerial or the high skilled labor. It just in terms of actually seeing what you're doing there without just seeing someone got a better grade on a test. It's very abstracted away from the everyday life compared to, say, what you were doing, Christian, where you were working on an assembly floor, building computer parts.
Yeah. I mean, and in this case, you're even further away from production, I guess, in a way.
I mean, that's something I've come to realize is working class isn't a good definition for, especially as we progress into what people call the gig economy or whatever. Like maybe we're all working class, but then there's people that now you have a whole part of this gig economy that is people teaching other people intellectual skills, which used to be non-commodified, but are now becoming commodified.
Right. You can make a living just by teaching people how to use the software they bought.
Yeah, but what you do? You're exchanging money between working class people, so it's not
right.
The money commodity isn't going up or down in levels between people. It's just staying at the same place, exchanging hands. It's more of a barter economy, actually.
Maybe that's something we should look into as we go further along into capital. I feel like when you sell your ability to use a software program, and teach a lesson to someone else, that you're charging rent for your intellectual property. I think that's what you're doing, but your property is really small, limited, and your ability to sell it or charge rent for it is limited as well. But yeah, we'll go into that. Maybe we'll have to get to Capital Volume 2 to really cover the intricacies of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you have to read it.
Yeah. Away.
All right, so we got a buzzing sound. Is that you?
It's probably me. I don't know why. I
Stop.
think my laptop microphone is just terrible.
Well, great. We'll stop buzzing.
Okay.
God damn it, Ben.
I'll mute myself again.
So I feel like we're coming up. Maybe we've done this almost long enough. But do people have questions about the text, about capital, or anything else they want to bring up here as we almost close out this session? Ernesto?
I'm good.
All right. Well, listen, guys. Next time we'll hit the 3 and 4 and chapter 1, and I will be even more prepared. I'll put my green screen up. I'll shower beforehand. It will be beautiful.
Great.
And
you have lovely hair.
Thank you, thank you.
You don't have to share.
All right. And yeah, and I hope everyone comes back for the next session, which maybe will be 2 weeks. What do you guys think? Would that sound good?
Cool.
That works for me.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast and say goodbye to everybody.